I spent 35 years in the RCMP. I've investigated hundreds of homicides. This is by far the worst despicable crime I've ever been involved in.
We didn't know at the time how many people were in the back seat of the car.
Where's the motive? Why did 6 people have to be killed?
It's midsummer in West Bank, British Columbia, in the beautiful Okanagan. The Johnson family, Bob and Jackie Johnson, and their daughters Karen and Janet begin to pack their car for a family camping trip. They plan to meet Jackie's parents, George and Edith Bentley, at the Old Bear Creek prison site just outside of the Wells Gray Provincial Park. Unbeknownst to the family, a danger lurked in the shadows. A man with a dark and horrific motive would stalk this family for days, and this motive would trigger the events that led to this violent mass murder.
The family they were such a beautiful unit. I mean, Jackie loved her husband, Bob loved Jackie, the kids loved their parents, and the parents loved the kids.
It is now August 16th, and the family should have returned from their trip. However, Bob fails to arrive at work. After a series of phone calls, it would become apparent the entire family is missing.
It could have been a car mishap or something else. But later on in the day, he still hadn't showed up, and he hadn't contacted anybody, which was completely out of character.
I was thinking maybe an accident happened and they were unable to get help, or they were trapped in an area because it's so dense up there.
Then the second day, nothing again.
By then, Uncle Bob would have found some way to get some sort of help if they were in any kind of trouble.
On August 23rd, a missing persons report is filed with the Clearwater RCMP. Friends, family, and police begin a massive search of the Wells Gray Provincial Park and the surrounding areas. After days of no leads, hope started to fade for the Johnson-Bentley family.
We suspected that by that time that they weren't coming back, so nobody was going to be found.
For whatever reason, they seem to have just disappeared off the face of the earth. How could Grandma and Grandpa, and Mom and Dad, and 2 little girls, aged 11 and 12 or 13, where they were, how could they disappear off the face of the earth?
On September 12th, nearly a month after the family vanished, a mushroom picker would come across the first major piece of evidence in this case. It was a burnt-out 1979 Plymouth Caravelle. He then reported it to the RCMP, and a unit would go investigate. After discovering what was inside the vehicle, they immediately called for backup. When investigators arrived, it was apparent there were many people's remains in this vehicle, but how many, they did not know.
It wasn't a pretty sight, it was a horrible sight. It actually defies description. What was left over, you could have put in a small paper bag. There was very, very, very little left of them.
Biggest thing that stands out in my memory is just the unreal nature of what we were dealing with. It was just so unreal. It's hard to describe.
After counting the bones in the back seat, they realized the remains were those of 4 adults. After locating a tire iron and using it to pry open the trunk, they would then discover the remains of 2 children. These remains were later identified as those of Bob and Jackie Johnson and their 2 daughters, Karen and Janet, as well as the remains of George and Edith Bentley. not be long after this that family and friends would get the tragic news.
I was at school. I was called down to the principal's office. He took me into his office and had a box of Kleenex sitting there and said that they got a phone call from a friend of mine saying that they found the car and the bodies were in the car. So it was a lot of sadness and a lot of tears, and, you know, the thing that you didn't want to hear was that they were dead.
Just complete shock. There was just disbelief. Nobody could believe that anything that gruesome could happen, and you just can't fathom the magnitude of the loss.
Investigators now begin a door-to-door canvass of Clearwater and the surrounding area.
We literally knocked on every door in Clearwater and the entire area out there and talked to everybody.
A week into the investigation, they receive a tip from a local park employee. He said he saw a truck and camper matching the description of the Bentleys at the local Bear Creek campsite. Later that day, teams would converge on the area and begin looking for evidence.
We found beer in the nearby creek that was left by somebody to keep cold, and it turned out it was the same style of beer, type of beer, or brand of beer that Bob Johnson drank. Just so many things about the campsite that it appeared that the Johnson and Bentleys had been there.
Combing the area for clues, they make a shocking discovery: a .22 caliber shell casing. As they continue to search, they recover 5 more .22 caliber shell casings. They believe this is where the murders took place and keep this quiet from the media and from the public. Now they must find the Bentley's 1981 Ford truck and camper. And what happens next will be one of the largest and wildest goose chases in RCMP history. They would create and air a reenactment depicting what they thought had happened to the Johnson Bentley family. This would be aired across the country. Over 1,000 tips would pour in from across the country, and a trail would lead investigators east. The RCMP would create a mock-up of the Bentley's pickup and camper. They would then follow the trail of leads while driving the mock-up truck and camper east.
We came up with the idea of why not take that truck and camper and sort of follow the route that the public has told us this is gone.
And we put big signs on the side and the back. Johnson and Bentley murders, British Columbia. Have you ever seen this vehicle?
On May 9, 1983, 2 officers would set out on a 3-week journey. They would follow the trail of tips and head east in hopes that someone may remember seeing this vehicle. And finally, there is a break in the case. A mechanic in Windsor, Ontario, reports he had painted this truck and camper recently. He also said they had a .22 caliber handgun they were looking to dispose of and were about to head south to Detroit. This could be the lead that breaks this case wide open. The RCMP makes contact with law enforcement in the United States. As this part of the investigation starts to take stride, something unexpected and shocking happens.
There is Mr. Bentley's truck. There's nothing left of it. It's a shell. There's nothing inside. Anybody who had flown over top of it would never have seen it.
Only 12 kilometers from where the families were believed to have been murdered lies the Bentley's pickup truck. Investigators begin to comb the scene for evidence and discover a .22 caliber bullet hole in the driver's door of the truck and decide to keep this a secret from the public. This bullet hole would be the next big lead in their case, finally exposing the monster behind these murders. Investigators now begin another canvass around the Clearwater area, as they believe the location of the truck would have only been known by a local resident. A series of suspects underwent polygraph tests, as well as constant surveillance. After 2 weeks of canvassing, interrogations, and surveillance, finally the case breaks wide open.
As they were leaving, the wife had said, hey, we'll tell them what Dave said. And of course, our door-to-door people, it was drilled into them. Nothing is too minute. The hubby felt it was nothing. But the wife said, well, Dave wanted to know how to register a vehicle or what he was going to do with a vehicle that had a bullet hole in the door.
At the time of the murders, David, who now lives in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, lived on his parents' ranch, not far from the crime scene. After receiving this tip from the husband and wife in Clearwater, the next step was to bring in Shearing for questioning.
He came in, sat down. There was an awful lot of body language from him, and he was sweating. His eyes were darting. He knew that something was up, and obviously he had a lot to hide.
Police would now lead David to believe he was there under suspicion of a hit and run.
Well, you could see the look on his face saying, wow, is that all this is?
You can imagine if you're a suspect or an accused and you say, hey, these guys are here just to talk about a driving accident versus murders, that was pretty easy to confess to. And David confessed to that.
He looked very, very relieved to tell me. I thought, wow, I'm going to tell them this and then they're going to go home.
Mike reminded David that, I told you earlier, we're here to talk about a lot of things, and one of the things we're going to talk about is the Johnson Bentley murders, which I'm sure you know about. Yeah, you've heard of them, of course, Matt. And Mike threw out the question, you know about this, and you heard obviously where the car was found. It was all public knowledge. You heard the truck was found. Yeah.
About 3/4 of an hour into the interview, I said to him, do you know who the Johnson and Bentleys killed? He said, the old Bear Creek campsite, wasn't it? I mean, that just about floored me when he said, the Bear Creek campsite, because nobody knew that. I mean, it was something that we hadn't publicized, but it was the actual murder scene. I kept pressing him for answers, and he started smoking his cigarettes as fast as he could, one after the other. I kept saying, we know that you're going to tell us that you did. It's just a matter of when.
David begins to break over the hours and finally begins to confess.
When he started to cry, I had asked him, why did you do it? And he'd say something like, I don't know.
David would now begin to give investigators chilling and horrific details about the crime.
And then he started describing to me basically how he'd driven by a number of times on his way to work. One night, he says, I snuck down. I watched them at nighttime as they were all sitting around the campfire. He saw the tent and the car and the Bentley truck and camper all set up and the little girls. He walked into camp. Bob Johnson saw him first. Bob stood up and saw this man coming towards him with a gun, and he just shot him. He went down. And then he shot the grandpa, Mr. Bentley. Then he shot the wife, I understand. And then he shot Mrs. Bentley as she was trying to run up the camper. The last people that he kills is the two little girls. And the sole motive for killing 6 defenseless people is merely for the possessions. He wanted the truck and camper, he wanted the tools, and he wanted the tent, he wanted the boat and motor. Simple as that. I mean, there's got to be more to it. You don't kill for that. I mean, that's the only reasons he's giving us.
Mike would continue to pressure David until finally...
I said, David, I want to know exactly what happened. I want to know exactly what happened. So then he started telling me the story. He kept the girls alive. Purpose was for sexual gratification.
He would keep the young girls alive for almost 2 weeks. The horrific events they endured are too horrifying and unimaginable to go into detail. These events, however, truly show that David Shearing is a monster. David Shearing would now be arrested and would plead guilty to all 6 counts of murder during his trial. He would be sentenced to life without parole for 25 years, a sentence that many disagreed with.
The guy was a monster. The guy that was in the front of me was a monster. I mean, there was just no rationale for what happened.
I know how I'd feel if it was one of mine.
Put him in the electric chair. To hell with him. No, I think he should be capital punishment if he was the one that done it.
It's not like he just killed one person, he killed 6. You know, molested 2 girls. You know, that's a sick person. August 1982, a tragedy that will never be understood, sadly missed by all who loved them. In death they were never parted, ever remembered, ever loved.
In 2021, David Shearing, now known as David Ennis, was eligible and applied for parole. However, family, friends, and the public fought and won to keep this monster behind bars for the rest of his life.